Okay, well, welcome back to the Superlite Coupe build. We are down in the Joel K workshop, and a number of videos ago I sort of made a statement that I won't really document the fabricating of any more brackets. And a few of the followers and viewers sort of seemed disappointed that they really enjoyed watching me come up with the approach in machining up brackets for certain use cases. So I figured I'll do an episode on making some brackets, so bracket lovers rejoice here. And this one's sort of a non-trivial bracket, so let me give you a sense for what I'm looking to do. I did come up with a design for the cooling tube brackets, but after further thinking about it, those brackets only basically secured the cooling tubes to the chassis pan, and then I still had to find another way to mount the heater and AC hoses. So I've come up with this approach where I want to make 6 of these brackets, and essentially I only want to mount everything with just 2 bolts. So I'm going to have a sort of a clamp style bracket that will clamp the cooling tube down, and then the top part of the bracket will also have an extension so that I can attach up to 4 steel hose clamps that align with silicone. So the idea is, it'll be a compact design. It'll be rattle free because it'll all be lined in silicone. It'll keep all these hoses spaced so they won't rub and squeak together. And then also, if I have to get any of these tubes out of the car, I can simply unbolt these tubes and I can pull the heater and AC hoses out, or I can also pull the cooling tube out. And then I do have an idea of how to line it back up and insert it without removing the body. Okay, so what I've done is, and that's sort of my engineering drawing. That's about as sophisticated as they get. I sort of enjoy this by hand approach and so forth. But anyway, I got a hunk of aluminum. So I'm going to make the bottom parts of the brackets, which are 1.25 inches for each one. So I'll cut 6 of those out. Then the top piece is about 3 3/4, and then I'll start to shape those pieces. Okay, so I'm just going to slice this up with a handsaw or a jigsaw, a hand jigsaw, and then I'll square them up with the mill, and then we'll take a look at some of the parts. All right, well, here's a little work in process. So far I've cut 2 of these items. These will be 1.25 inches each. These will be the bottom piece of the clamp. You can see the cut is actually pretty smooth, and I'm using just a hand jigsaw, and it follows the line really well. Let's see, recently I did excuse me, I did invest in a new jigsaw. I got this at Home Depot. It's maximum amperage, like 6.1 amps, and my favorite feature on this is it's got a little spotlight there, so it makes it easy to follow the lines. The other thing is, to cut aluminum, I use these 24 TPI blades, and I keep the blades well lubricated with some oil. I don't really use the aluminum cutting fluid, just this oil seems to work better. It doesn't give off fumes like the aluminum cutting fluid. And anyway, that's sort of a primitive approach, but it works really well. And then what I'll do is, once I trim up all these blocks, then I'll put these on the mill and square them up and get them to length. Okay, so that's the approach. Okay, well, here's a little work in process. I basically have taken the mill and I've milled down each one of these to 1.25 inches, plus or minus about 1/100 of an inch. But they're nice and square, nice and flat, nice and smooth. And these are like professional parts. And then the taller pieces, only mill down one side, because this side we're going to machine. we're going to machine further. Let's see, let me just give you a little demonstration with regard to the mill here. So I've got my mill end, which is the drill bit to do the milling of the machine. Have it set up so that I can take 5 inches thick worth of material off in one pass. But to do that, I have to cut just a very small amount of material. Each turn on the mill is about a 1/16 of an inch, and I only do about an 1/8 of a turn. So if you do the math, I'm taking off, a fraction of an inch, but it works out okay. Let's see, we'll make a pass now. So what I do is every pass I always dab on some, there we go, dab on some machine oil. To get the mill going, it's a variable speed mill, get it up to about 1,000 RPM, and then I slowly turn the mill and start to make contact with the metal. Just a little bit. Sorry for the shaky camera. There we go. That's about good. And we gotta lock the mill in place. And you see it sort of started to machine some of that metal towards the end. Okay, it's a little thicker towards the end, so I'm going to unlock it. And I'm going to just turn this about an 1/8 of the turn, lock it back, and then we'll bring it back the other way. The mill is just a lot of fun. You got to pay attention because you don't have the part locked down properly, or you don't have the bill grit tightened up. The machine can malfunction pretty easily. But this is sort of a hobby grade machine, and I've been able to make some pretty, in my opinion, some impressive parts. Got quite a bit of metal here. So once we're done with this test, we'll take a look at it. Look at that. Well, the jigsaw made it pretty flat. That was really the second pass. It's a little rough on the end. I'll do one more pass and this part will be ready. Alright, well here's the next step, and basically I've marked up the larger piece here, and the idea is I want to cut away this area and this area, and then basically be able to mount one of these rubber or silicone P-clamps, this orientation and then upside down, and on the other side. So I get up to four hoses I could attach to this. So the idea here is I have a number of different lines, and the lower line is the actual line I want to mill to, and the inside line is the actual line I want to mill to, basically making the center section 3/8 inch. That'll be sturdy enough. The idea is I'm going to take a drill bit and line it up in the vise and drill right to the inner lines, and then I'll use the hand jigsaw and cut to the outer line, and then use the mill to trim it up. The jigsaw, can cut a little bit on an angle, so I want to leave some room for error here. The idea here is just to get that drill bit in the right place, and then I'll show how I'll orient it in the vise, and essentially all I have to do is line the bottom edge with the vise, and then drill it once, flip it over, drill it again. Then the rest of these I don't even have to mark, so that'll make sort of a jig to cut these holes. So we'll see how it turns out. Alright, well this is how I go about lining these the drill bits up. So I basically take a square piece of metal and line it up with the line, and then move the outside of the drill bit over, and I do it on the y-axis. I also do it on the x-axis, and I'm using a nice big thick drill. I get a nice curved radius sort of on the bottom of the piece. Also, these big thick drills, they sort of don't bend, they go in nice and straight. Alright, so I'm going to drill in nice and slow, make sure I didn't cut too far in, I think we'll be in good shape. Started drilling. Actually forgot to lock the plate in, so we're really right on that line. Yeah, there's no room for error now. So I think we're looking good. I'm going to finish drilling this out, and then we'll flip it over and we'll drill the other hole, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, well that came out well. Hard to see with all the glare, but right on that inner line and right on that inner line. So I lined this up right with the edge of the mill. So now this is all locked into place with these locks on this side, and there's a lock on this side as well. Then what I'll do is I just flip it over, and it'll be a mirror image of each other, and I don't have to sort of eyeball this anymore, and I'll drill this up. And once I drill these up, then I'll just use the jigsaw, cut this way, that way, and then use the mill to clean it up. Okay? Alright, so we got this ready, flipped over, lined up flat, and we'll drill this hole. When you're drilling a hole, you really don't need to, people like to have these bits drive really fast. What we do is burn the bits up. You just got to let the tool do the work. Nice and easy. Sort of just getting started. So now it's cut into that aluminum without a lot of work. And once I do a little cutting, I shut it off, and then I put a dot of oil in. There we go. So more than a dot. It's actually a lot of oil. A bit too much. But you know what? It cuts better. And the drills last a lot longer. Look at that. Cutting like butter. Or as we say in New York, butter. But anyway, it's doing good. Alright, I'll finish drilling this out. We'll take a look at it. We flip this over, and you can see it's all lined up beautiful right on those lines. So I'll do this to the rest of the brackets, and then we'll get the hand jigsaw out. We'll cut these areas out. Well, we're done drilling all these holes, and these came out great. So these are all the larger pieces. What I think I'm going to do next, instead of cutting these out with the jigsaw, I'm actually going to drill the threaded holes in the top block, and then drill the larger holes in the bottom block. And the idea is, like I covered with the original drawing, to have some screws come up through the chassis, through the lower block, and then secure into the top block. So if I want to get all these components out of the car, I unscrew the bottom bolts, and the whole assembly can be taken out of the car through the back channel of the body. Okay, so we got to do a little math here, a little calculus, as I say. So I want to find the center point of the area between the cooling tube and where the screw is going to go, and these are M8 screws. So this block is 3 inches wide. The pipes are 1.5 inches wide, but I have a 1 5/8 inch hole saw, so I'll line this with the 1/16 of an inch silicone channel to keep it from squeaking and banging around. So basically I subtract the two. Each side to the left and right of the cooling tube is 0.6875. I divide that by 2, and I've got 0.34375. So I used my micrometer and I marked the channel here. So I'm going to put this in the mill and use a Christmas tree bit and get it dead on there. And just like I use the jig or use the mill as a jig, excuse me, I'm going to do the same thing, so I don't have to move the drill once I set it up. I'm going to drill this hole, then I'll flip it around and drill this hole. Then I'll change the bit to a little smaller bit because I have to tap it. I'll drill it here and then flip it over and drill it there. And I'm going to do that, and then we'll see how it turns out. Alright, so I used a Christmas tree bit, and hard to tell with the angle, but to my eye that's sort of dead on. And these Christmas tree bits, you know, they're nice and sturdy, and they cut a nice round hole. So I use them to sort of set where the drill is going to go. And I'll lock the mill up. And then what I did was I bought these stubby drills, those short drill bits, so these don't flex as much, and I also need the clearance. You know, this milling drill is not like a drill press, it's not too tall. So this is the 8mm, so I'm going to use this drill to drill through the bottom pieces, and then I'll use the little narrower drill and tap out the M8 holes. So I'm going to do all the bottom pieces, and then I'll do the top pieces. But now all I have to do is, you know, flip this around and drill another hole, and then do the same thing with the top pieces using the smaller drill bit. Okay, so I'm done drilling the holes out of the lower brackets, and look at them. I mean, they came out great. I mean, perfectly centered, equidistant. I mean, this is beautiful. It's a little more trickier than it seems. You know, you think just drilling a hole straight up and down is easy, but you got to get these pieces totally perpendicular in order to drill straight through. So here's the trick I use. You know, I know the vise itself lays flat on the base, and the side of the vise is perpendicular to the base, and you know the drill head is perpendicular, you know, to the base as well. So I take a piece of stock that I know is totally flat, and then I use a clamp, and I clamp the vise, and then I press this up against the vise as I tighten the vise on the piece of metal, and that gets it totally perpendicular. So I'm going to take this off, and here we go. Fill this. So now, you know, we've got this totally flush, and that's going to go, you know, we're going to go down about 1.25 inches, and then we'll tap these holes out, and then we'll assemble the brackets. We'll take a look at them. Okay, so I cut out the areas on the side of the top of the bracket. You know, you can see, you know, I undercut them a little bit, and that was by design, so I'll use the mill and you know, basically make it meet up with the curvature of those holes. This is probably a tad too tall. I chop off a little bit, but the idea here is you've got the bottom bracket and you have the top bracket. These will have the threads in it, and then we have the silicone clamps, and we'll just find a hole and screw these in there, and then we'll have the other ones up, you know, up top. So in all, we're getting there. We're closing in. So I'm going to cut the rest of these up and then mill them up, and really the last step is to tap these holes and then to drill the 5/8 inch hole in the center once I have these clamped together. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. Okay, well, we made a lot of progress. Let's see, so I'm done with all the top brackets. So we've got those smaller holes drilled, nice and perpendicular. Cut these tops out with the jigsaw, then cleaned it up with the mill. And we've got a nice sort of curvature there. I sort of like that, adds a little strength. Let's see, we've got 3 steps to go. I gotta tap these holes out for the top bracket. I've got to drill a 5mm hole sort of in the center for the P-clamps to mount. And then what I'll do is I'm going to clamp these together, and then I'll put it in the milling drill, and then use this 1 5/8 inch hole saw, and we'll cut the area out to clamp on the cooling tubes. Okay, so we'll yeah, I'll document the next couple steps for completeness, and then we'll see what they look like on the car. Okay, we're making some progress here. So I assembled one of these brackets. We drilled the holes on the side to hold the hose clamps, and this is designed to hold up to four hoses. If for some reason I need to add more, I could always add an extension onto the top, but I don't see that happening. I also bolted up with the M8 bolts. So these are nice big sturdy bolts. I chose M8A. They got a deep thread, to thread into the aluminum, and they're going to be pretty tall bolts. They'll probably, thread in about an inch, and they could be viewed as a little top heavy with these hoses on the top. So I just wanted to make sure I used a substantial bolt. All right, so now what I'm going to do is drill, use the hole saw and drill this out for the cooling tube. These hole saws are always a little tricky. If you saw the steering rack episode, the hole saw could really dig into the aluminum and do some damage if you're not careful. So I'm going to take it nice and easy, use plenty of oil, and we'll cut one up and then we'll take a look at it. All right, well, before I do the hole saw, once again, I set the vise up like a jig. So I have the 8mm bolts that thread into the top of the block, and we want to have these secured so that it doesn't separate or shake when we cut the hole in the joined piece. The other thing is I could use these washers to line up this piece repeatedly, and I have some spacers underneath it so it's level. It's I know the known distance to the center, and then I use the Christmas tree bit to get a nice pilot hole centered in the crosshairs. Okay, so I got this set up once. Now I can drill 6 holes and make quicker work of it. All right, well, you can tell we're getting to the tail end here. The workbench is starting to look like it's back to its natural habitat. Just amazing. Every project, it looks like a complete disaster. But anyway, last step here. Basically, this is what I've decided to do. I've played around with a couple of these, and the drill press or the mill is just not strong enough to turn that hole saw. And these hole saws are really not ideal for cutting metal so thick. So here's the approach. I've got this 8-amp drill that I use for the easy car lift, and what I do is I'm going to drill halfway through on this side and then halfway through on the other side. But what I do is, I'll drill down a little bit on this side, turn it over, drill it down a little bit on the other side, so that the holes really line up. Because as you drill, the center hole can wander a tiny bit. And the challenge with this is, you look at these teeth, and this is sort of a heavy duty drill bit. It drills good up until it gets to the top of the teeth, or the bottom of the teeth, however you want to, whatever your perspective is. And the reason is in the beginning it throws the chips out quickly and it keeps cutting, but once it gets to a certain depth it stops cutting. So you have to keep taking it out, cleaning out the chips, cleaning the teeth off, and then drilling down. So what I've learned is by doing, one side, a little over 1/4 of an inch, and then the other side a little over 1/4 of an inch, I get the teeth on the hole saw to work much more effectively, and this goes a lot quicker. But each one of these takes a good 15 to 20 minutes to do, so it does take a bit of time. All right, but I've got 2 left to go, and then we'll take a look at the brackets. Okay, we got this one done. And every time I do these and use a tool, I learn a little bit more. So, the first one took forever to do because I started using the mill. And then the second one, I drilled with the hand drill all the way through. And then I realized, the aluminum dust is clogging up the drill bit. In this one, what I did was, I started it on both sides to make sure, the both sides would match up. And then as I'm drilling, I could feel that the drill bit's getting a little clogged with dust, and I basically pick it up while it's spinning, and it expels a lot of the particles outside the channel, and then I start to drill again. And then I do that a few times, and then I add some cutting fluid in. So I drilled out 5 of these with the same blade, and you know, that's nice. So I had one hole saw and I could do all six parts, and that drill is still sharp, which is great. All right, so I'm going to finish this last one up. I'm going to hit these with the sander. We'll take a look at them, and then we'll call it a wrap after we show them on the car installed. Okay, well, there they are. They're all done. All 6 brackets. I'm really happy with the way they turned out. I mean, anytime you fabricate things, it's a ton of work, but I softened the lines up a little bit on the shoulders and on the top. Cleaned up the inside area. I wind up putting some silicone tape to protect the cooling tubes. And anyway, you know, I think they're going to do the job. You know, they'll be removable. They'll hold all the AC and heater hoses and the cooling tubes on the passenger side, and then on the driver's side, they'll hold probably the battery cable, the cooling tube, the bleeder hose valve, and also the vacuum line for the power brake booster. All right, so let's see this. The next segue will be the last one, and we'll show these brackets in the car with the tubes installed. All right, so this will be the final episode of this video. We've got the brackets installed on the car, and you know, let me go back here. I mean, this is what the car looks like at this point. You know, I sort of fail to, I get so focused on these parts, I fail to give everybody a glance at what it's looking like, but it's slowly morphing into a real automobile. Anyway, let's see. Before I point out or show the details, you know, I did mention I want to make this whole sub-assembly removable. And at this point, the way it's set up, it would be really difficult to reinstall this setup through the holes in the chassis. So that will require a little more work, and I may address that before I button the whole car up. I'm thinking I would take those 3 brackets and weld them to a plate, and then have that plate, you know, match the holes in the chassis perfectly, so the whole sub-assembly would drop right in. But anyway, let's see. So, you know, this is what it looks like. I'll give you a little close-up here. So I think they look really good. I put some silicone rubber tape or rubber strips inside the clamps. All the clamps are held very securely, and this rubber will droop a little bit when it gets hot, but there's a nice amount of distance, you know, horizontally and also vertically, so these can droop a little bit and they're not going to tap into each other. So all in all, I think this looks pretty good. Let's see. The hoses on the front are nicely organized. In an upcoming video, I'm going to put the body back on the car for fitting now that the chassis is squared up, and you know, we'll see how things look. This, I may have to convert this to a short drop AC hose elbow. That may interfere with the body. It's going to be close, but we'll see. And let's take a look over at the driver's side. It's not nearly as complicated. And there's only 2 hoses. We've got the bleeder hose, which goes from the radiator, and it's going to go up to the header tank. And then we have the vacuum hose that'll be routed to the manifold on the LT4 engine. Okay, so anyway, that's about it. Thanks for following along, and take care.